I knew the HOA in this neighborhood was bad, but I didn't realize just how petty they could be until I woke up to a mountain of garbage dumped on my front lawn. Black trash bags, broken pieces of furniture, rotting food. It was disgusting. The smell alone made my stomach churn. I stood there, hands on my hips, staring at the mess in disbelief. This wasn't some accident. This was deliberate. And I had a pretty good idea who was behind it. Harriet Whitman, the HOA president, had been on my case ever since I moved in. She was a middle-aged woman with a permanent scowl and a voice that could slice through steel. Her favorite pastime was making everyone's life miserable with endless fines and ridiculous rules. And her latest demand? A mandatory HOA fee that wasn't listed in any of the original agreements when I bought my house. I refused. Plain and simple. The HOA had no legal right to force me into paying fees I never agreed to, and I wasn't about to roll over just because Harriet thought she ran this neighborhood like some kind of dictator. I had the paperwork to back me up too. My property wasn't even technically part of the HOA. But Harriet didn't care about laws, just control. And now, after weeks of me ignoring her threats, this was her retaliation. I heard the telltale sound of heels clicking against pavement. I turned just in time to see Harriet sauntering over, arms crossed, a smug expression plastered across her face. "Oh dear," she said, pretending to be shocked. "What a mess. You really should keep your property clean, Marcus." I clenched my jaw. "You did this." Her eyes widened in mock innocence. "Me? Oh, Marcus, let's not go throwing around baseless accusations. Maybe if you were a little more cooperative with the HOA, things like this wouldn't happen." I took a slow breath, keeping my temper in check. "That sounds an awful lot like a threat." She gave me a sickly sweet smile. "Not a threat, just a friendly suggestion. You know, this kind of neglect could get you fined." I barked out a laugh. "I'm not even part of the HOA, Harriet." Her smile faltered for a brief second before she recovered. "Oh, but the neighborhood is changing, Marcus. We're working on annexing properties that weren't originally included. It's only a matter of time before you'll have to follow our rules." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Harriet, enjoy this little power trip while you can. Because you have no idea who you just messed with." She snorted. "Oh, please. What are you going to do? Call a lawyer? Good luck with that. The HOA board has more resources than you could ever dream of." I let her walk away, thinking she'd won. She had no clue. See, Harriet thought I was just some stubborn homeowner refusing to play by her rules. What she didn't know was that I was married to the mayor's daughter. And if there was one thing my father-in-law absolutely despised, it was corrupt HOAs overstepping their authority. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. As soon as the line connected, I didn't even bother with pleasantries. "We've got a problem," I said, "and I need it handled fast." I didn't have to wait long for a response. Within the hour, my father-in-law, Mayor Richard Calloway, called me back. His voice carried that same no-nonsense tone he used in press conferences when dealing with corrupt officials. He wasn't just annoyed, he was furious. After I gave him a rundown of what had happened, he wasted no time setting things in motion. He told me to document everything and assured me that he'd have a legal team look into the HOA's recent activities. I didn't doubt for a second that Harriet and her board had more skeletons in their closet than just this stunt. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of the garbage covering my lawn. Close-ups of the trash bags, broken furniture, and scattered debris. Then I walked around the perimeter of my property, checking for security camera footage. I had installed a few discrete cameras around the house when I first moved in, just in case. Now they were about to pay off. After pulling up the footage on my laptop, I watched as a group of HOA board members Harriet included dragged trash bags from a pickup truck and dumped them right onto my yard in the dead of night. Their faces were clear as day. They weren't even trying to hide it. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was underestimating just how much influence my father-in-law had. By midday, I had forwarded all the footage and photographic evidence to Richard's office. He assured me that his legal team was already combing through HOA bylaws and local ordinances to find every possible violation they could pin on Harriet and her little council of tyrants. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I wanted to gauge how other homeowners felt about the HOA. It didn't take long to realize I wasn't the only one they had targeted. A retired veteran named Joe, who lived 2 houses down, told me they had hit him with bogus fines for unauthorized modifications after he installed a wheelchair ramp for his wife. Another resident, a single mother named Lisa, had been repeatedly harassed over the color of her front door, even though it had been the same shade since she moved in. The more people I talked to, the clearer it became Harriet wasn't just power-hungry, she was running a full-blown racket, using HOA rules as a weapon against anyone who didn't bow to her authority. By the time I got back to my house, I had a plan. That night, I sent an email to every homeowner in the neighborhood. I attached the security footage and explained exactly what had happened. I also included a list of legal violations the HOA had committed, courtesy of Richard's legal team. And finally, I invited them all to a community meeting the following evening. The response was overwhelming. People were fed up, and now that they had undeniable proof of the HOA's corruption, they were ready to fight back. The next evening, the community center was packed. Homeowners filled every seat, and others stood along the walls. Harriet and her board sat at the front, looking smug like they thought they were about to shut down whatever I had planned. I stepped up to the podium, cleared my throat, and projected my voice so everyone could hear. I called this meeting because I think we all deserve to know the truth about the people running this HOA. Murmurs spread throughout the crowd. Harriet folded her arms, tilting her chin up like she was already dismissing me. I clicked a button on my laptop, and a projector screen lit up behind me. The footage played the whole neighborhood watching as Harriet and her board members dumped trash onto my property. Gasps and whispers filled the room. A few people even shouted in outrage. Then, I pulled up the list of legal violations. Not only did they trespass on private property, but they also engaged in illegal dumping. And this isn't the first time they've abused their authority. Many of you have been victims of their tactics. Harriet shot up from her seat, her face red with anger. This is a gross misrepresentation. You manipulated that footage. I turned to her, calm and unbothered. Oh, really? Because this footage is already in the hands of the city attorney's office. And I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing your explanation. The room exploded into a frenzy. Homeowners were livid. People stood up, shouting about their own grievances. Joe, the veteran, held up a stack of bogus fines he had received. Lisa recounted how she had been harassed over the color of her door. One by one, residents came forward with their stories, and each one painted the same picture: an HOA that had been abusing its power for years. Harriet's smug mask cracked. She glanced at her fellow board members, but they were already shrinking in their seats, realizing that this was spiraling out of control. I let the chaos settle before delivering the final blow. The city is now conducting a full audit of the HOA's finances and policies. If any funds have been misused, if any laws have been broken, there will be consequences. Harriet looked like she wanted to disappear. And just like that, the tide had turned. The homeowners weren't afraid anymore. They saw Harriet and her board for what they truly were: bullies who had finally been caught. I stepped away from the podium, letting the residents take over. The HOA board members tried to push back, but it was too late. The community had spoken, and they weren't backing down. This was only the beginning. Harriet had played her hand, thinking she could intimidate me. Instead, she had just sealed her own fate. The room was no longer a meeting, it was an uprising. Harriet sat stiffly in her chair, her fingers gripping the table as if anchoring herself. The rest of the HOA board was in full retreat, avoiding eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The homeowners, on the other hand, had found their voices. People who had been bullied into silence were now standing up, recounting their own mistreatment, demanding answers. Joe had just finished explaining how they had tried to fine him for the wheelchair ramp when a woman named Rachel stepped forward. She was holding a stack of letters, shaking them in the air. "They threatened to put a lien on my house," she shouted. "For what? Because I left my recycling bin out for an extra day? I got a bill for $300 over that. And when I asked for proof that it was even a violation, they ignored me." A chorus of agreement rippled through the crowd. The more people spoke, the clearer it became Harriet and her board weren't just overstepping their authority. They were running a full-fledged extortion scheme. Harriet finally pushed herself up from her chair, forcing a tight-lipped smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "I understand you're all upset," she said, her voice strained. "But this meeting is getting out of hand. We have procedures in place to handle disputes." A man near the front cut her off. "Oh, you mean those fake appeals you never approve? We've all been through that circus, Harriet. We file a complaint and somehow the HOA always wins. Funny how that works. Laughter and bitter agreement followed. Harriet's face darkened, but she forced her expression back into neutrality. I could see it, she was scrambling. She had walked in here convinced she could intimidate me, maybe even spin the situation in her favor. But now, her entire empire was crumbling in front of her. I let the crowd have their say before stepping forward again. The room quieted as I raised my hand. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice firm. I've already submitted the security footage and documentation to the city attorney's office. A full financial audit of the HOA starts this week. If there's any sign of misused funds, unauthorized fines, or legal violations, there will be consequences. The city will also be reviewing every single fine issued in the last 5 years. A murmur swept through the crowd. Harriet's stoic mask cracked. Her lips parted slightly, her breathing quick and shallow. I wasn't done. As of now, I continued, I'm also organizing a petition for a recall vote. Every single one of you on this board is going to answer for what you've done. If enough homeowners vote, you're out. That set off a wave of cheers. People clapped, some pumping their fists in the air. The energy in the room had shifted completely. This wasn't just a pushback anymore, it was a reckoning. Harriet's nails dug into the table, her knuckles turning white. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. This is absurd, she snapped. You can't just overthrow an HOA. There are rules, regulations. I met her gaze with an unwavering stare. And you've broken every single one of them. Before she could fire back, another voice cut in. We have enough people here to start the recall process tonight, Joe said, his deep voice carrying through the room. Let's do it. The crowd erupted again, this time with unanimous agreement. Several residents pulled out their phones, recording the moment. Harriet turned to the other board members, expecting them to back her up. But they were already distancing themselves. One of them, a wiry man named Greg, cleared his throat and stood up. I never agreed with some of these policies, he announced. I tried to push back, but Harriet spun on him. Oh, don't you dare throw me under the bus. Greg straightened his shoulders. I'm not going down for this, Harriet. I quit. The other board members exchanged looks before 2 more of them followed suit. They stood up, shaking their heads, muttering about how they hadn't been involved in the worst of it. Harriet was losing control, and she knew it. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Rachel, the woman they had threatened with a lean, stepped forward again. I think it's time for you to leave, Harriet, she said. For good. A wave of agreement followed. The homeowners stepped closer together, a united front. Harriet's face was a mask of fury, but she had no moves left. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched out of the room. The moment the door slammed shut behind her, the room erupted into cheers. I exhaled, feeling the weight of the night settle over me. This wasn't over, not yet. But we had won the first battle. The recall vote would happen, the financial audit would dig up whatever Harriet had been hiding, and soon this neighborhood would be free from her grip. Joe clapped me on the back. That was impressive, he said. She never saw it coming. I smirked. She should have done her homework before messing with me. The fight wasn't over. But Harriet had made the mistake of thinking she was untouchable. Now, she was about to learn the hard way no one is above the law. As soon as the meeting ended, the homeowners wasted no time organizing the recall vote. A few volunteers gathered signatures while others coordinated with the city to ensure the process was done by the book. The momentum was unstoppable, and Harriet knew it. She had slithered out of the community center without another word, but I had no doubt she was already scrambling to find a way to salvage her position. I wasn't going to give her that chance. The next morning, I met with the city attorney's office. They had already begun their review of the HOA's finances, and what they found was damning. Misappropriated funds, inflated fines that had been funneled into administrative costs, and a suspicious number of payments made to a private account linked to Harriet herself. It was fraud, plain and simple. By early afternoon, I received a call from my father-in-law. He told me that the city had officially launched an investigation into the HOA and to expect the auditors to start combing through their records by the end of the week. Harriet's days of unchecked power were numbered. That evening, as I was sweeping up the last of the garbage from my lawn, a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Harriet's grim expression. She wasn't alone. Her husband, a wiry man with thinning hair and an impatient glare, was in the passenger seat. She leaned out slightly, her voice sharp. We need to talk. I dropped the broom, brushing my hands against my jeans. Unless it's an apology and your resignation, I'm not interested. Her husband scoffed. Oh, don't flatter yourself. You think you've won, but you have no idea what kind of chaos you've stirred up. I crossed my arms. Enlighten me. Harriet's expression tightened. You've made things worse for everyone. Do you really think the city is going to fix everything? They'll just replace us with another board and you won't be any better off. If you drop this now, I can make sure you don't face any retaliation. I let out a dry laugh. Retaliation? That sounds an awful lot like another threat, Harriet. You might want to rethink your approach. Her husband leaned forward, his voice lowering. You don't know who you're dealing with. I took a step closer to the car, lowering my voice to match his. Neither do you. Harriet's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. The HOA's finances are complicated. If you push this too far, who knows what might happen? Maybe the city finds some excuse to increase property taxes or shut down community amenities. Is that what you want? I shook my head. You're really reaching now, aren't you? The city isn't the problem, you are. And every homeowner in this neighborhood knows it. Her husband exhaled sharply through his nose, clearly irritated. Harriet's fingers tightened on the wheel. She had come here expecting to intimidate me into backing down, but it was clear she was realizing just how little leverage she had left. She sighed, her tone shifting. Fine. What do you want? I tilted my head. What do I want? That's simple. I want you gone. I want every fraudulent fine refunded. I want every homeowner you've bullied to get justice. And I want you to face legal consequences for what you've done. Her husband's face darkened. You're making a mistake. I gave him a flat look. No, Harriet made the mistake when she thought she could control this neighborhood like a personal fiefdom. Harriet's lips thinned as she put the SUV into drive. You're going to regret this. I stepped back as the vehicle sped off. I didn't bother watching them go. Let them stew in their frustration. It wouldn't change anything. The next morning, the recall vote was officially underway. Homeowners flooded the polling station set up in the community center, eager to cast their ballots. By noon, it was clear that Harriet and her board were losing by an overwhelming margin. Even some of the residents who had once supported her had turned against her after seeing the evidence of her corruption. By the evening, the results were in. Harriet and every remaining board member had been voted out by a landslide. I was standing on my porch when Joe walked up, grinning. It's done. She's out. I nodded. And the city's audit? He smirked. Ongoing, but they've already found enough to warrant legal action. Harriet's in deep. As if on cue, a police car rolled into the neighborhood, stopping in front of Harriet's house. A pair of uniformed officers stepped out, knocking on her door. The moment she opened it, I could see the defeat in her posture. They spoke to her for a few moments before she was escorted to the back of the car. Joe let out a low whistle. Didn't think I'd see the day. I exhaled, watching as the car pulled away. She thought she was untouchable. He nodded. Not anymore. With Harriet gone and the HOA under new leadership, the neighborhood finally had a chance to rebuild. The fraudulent fees were refunded, the ridiculous restrictions were lifted, and the community came together in a way it never had before. As I stood there, watching the last remnants of Harriet's reign crumble, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had tried to break me, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. The neighborhood felt different the next morning. Lighter. The oppressive weight of the HOA's rule had been lifted, and people were finally breathing freely again. It didn't take long for the news to spread. By midday, nearly everyone had heard about Harriet's arrest. Some watched from their porches as she had been taken away, while others had seen the police report confirming charges of fraud, embezzlement, and illegal property liens. But the work wasn't over. The HOA still needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. With Harriet and her cronies gone, a temporary committee had been formed from volunteers in the community. They were tasked with reviewing old policies, eliminating unnecessary fines, and restructuring how the HOA would function going forward. Joe had been one of the first to step up alongside Rachel and a few others who had been on the receiving end of Harriet's corruption. They had no interest in power, just fairness. That was the kind of leadership the neighborhood needed. I wasn't officially part of the new board, but I had no intention of stepping aside just yet. There were still loose ends to tie up. Early in the afternoon, I got a call from my father-in-law's office. The city's financial auditors had uncovered more than just fraudulent fines. They had dug up an entire web of shady dealings, misallocated funds, unauthorized expenditures, and payments made to third-party contractors that didn't seem to exist. Harriet hadn't just been running a scam. She had been siphoning money out of the HOA for years. That evening, I met with Joe and Rachel in my backyard. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the fence line. Joe leaned against the patio railing, arms crossed, while Rachel paced, her frustration evident. "The numbers don't add up," she said. "Thousands of dollars in maintenance fees that never actually went to maintenance. We're talking about money that just disappeared." Joe exhaled sharply. "And guess who was in charge of those budgets?" Rachel stopped pacing. "Harriet." I sat back in my chair, thinking. If she was funneling money out, she wasn't doing it alone. Someone else had to be in on it. Joe nodded. "The question is, who?" The new HOA committee had already started going through the financial records, but it would take time to untangle everything. Harriet had been careful to cover her tracks, but not careful enough. Rachel pulled out a folder and spread a few papers across the table. "Look at this. These are invoices for landscaping work. But the company listed here, it doesn't exist." I checked. I scanned the documents. So she was creating fake expenses and pocketing the money. Joe shook his head. "Unbelievable. And we were the ones getting fined for having the wrong mailbox color while she was stealing from us." Rachel tapped one of the documents. "We need to find out where this money actually went. If she had an account set up somewhere, we need to expose it." I made a note to contact the city investigators. If Harriet had been laundering money, they would find it. The next few days were a whirlwind. The recall vote had been the first victory, but now came the real battle fixing the damage Harriet had done. The new HOA board wasted no time overturning the ridiculous rules Harriet had put in place. The arbitrary fines were wiped clean, and residents who had been unfairly targeted were reimbursed. The lien threats against homeowners were rescinded, and the legal department was working to make sure the HOA returned to its intended function, helping the community, not extorting it. It was slow work, but it was progress. Then something unexpected happened. One evening, as I returned home from helping Joe organize old HOA documents, I found an envelope taped to my front door. No return address, just my name written in stiff, blocky letters. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A bank statement. Harriet's name was nowhere on it, but the transactions told a story. Large withdrawals made in increments funneled into an account under someone else's name. The name? Greg. One of the board members who had abandoned Harriet during the meeting. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. Someone had left this for me on purpose. Someone who knew more than they were willing to say out loud. Greg had played the part of the reluctant board member, acting like he had been trapped under Harriet's rule. But this document suggested otherwise. He hadn't just been complicit, he had been profiting. I wasted no time. I called Joe and Rachel, telling them to meet me at the community center. When we arrived, the place was still buzzing with activity. Residents were helping sort through old records, eager to clean up the mess Harriet had left behind. I pulled Joe and Rachel aside and showed them the bank statement. Joe's eyebrows shot up. "Greg? You think he was in on it the whole time?" Rachel scanned the document, her expression darkening. "There's no way he didn't know. These amounts are too large to be a coincidence." I nodded. "We need to confront him." We found Greg at the far end of the room, pretending to help sort files. He looked up as we approached, his expression guarded. Before he could speak, I held up the bank statement. "Care to explain this?" His eyes flickered to the paper, then back to me. "Where did you get that?" "That's not the question you should be asking," Rachel said. "The question is, how long were you stealing from us?" Greg's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Joe stepped closer, his voice low. "Don't play dumb. You bailed on Harriet the second things got bad, but you were right there with her when the money was disappearing." Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I wasn't as involved as you think." Rachel cut him off. "Then why is your name on an account connected to these withdrawals?" Greg swallowed hard. "You don't understand. Harriet was the one who handled everything. I folded my arms. "You just what?" "Took your cut and looked the other way." He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "I didn't think it would go this far." Rachel scoffed. "That's your excuse?" Joe shook his head. "You're done, Greg." "We're turning this over to the city investigators." Greg's face paled. Wait, we can work something out. I gave him a cold stare. The only thing left to work out is how much trouble you're in. As we walked away, Greg slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. The next morning, the city attorney's office received the bank statement, along with a formal complaint. Within 24 hours, Greg was arrested. The dominoes were falling, one by one. Harriet had been the ringleader, but she hadn't acted alone. Now, every single person who had benefited from her corruption was being held accountable. And the neighborhood? It was finally free. The fallout from Greg's arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People who had once quietly accepted the HOA's tyranny were now openly discussing just how deep the corruption had run. The more files we sifted through, the clearer it became that Harriet and her inner circle had been siphoning money for years, hiding behind fake invoices and fabricated expenses. The city investigators wasted no time. With Greg flipping almost immediately under pressure, they had enough to go after everyone involved. Subpoenas were issued, financial accounts were frozen, and more arrests followed. A former treasurer was taken in for wire fraud. Another board member was caught trying to destroy documents before they could be seized. The whole operation unraveled like a poorly sewn tapestry. But Harriet? She wasn't going down quietly. While she sat in a holding cell awaiting trial, she still had one last card to play. Her attorney filed a lawsuit against the neighborhood, claiming defamation, wrongful removal, and financial damages. She even tried to argue that the recall vote had been invalid due to procedural errors. It was a desperate move, but it meant one thing: she wasn't giving up without a fight. The problem was I wasn't either. The day before the first hearing, I met with my father-in-law at City Hall. His office was quiet, the blinds half drawn to block out the afternoon sun. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against a thick folder of legal documents. "She really thinks this is going to work?" he asked. "She's counting on the HOA bylaws being too tangled for anyone to unravel quickly," I said. "If she can stall long enough, she might convince some residents that she was wrongfully removed." He opened the folder, scanning a few pages. Except she wasn't. And the city's audit proved she was stealing. "That won't stop her from trying to spin the narrative," I said. "She's betting on confusion to buy her time." He set the pen down. "Then we make sure there is no confusion." The next morning, the courtroom was packed with residents, reporters, and legal representatives. Harriet sat stiff-backed at the plaintiff's table, her attorney whispering something in her ear. She barely glanced at me when I walked in, but the tension in her posture was unmistakable. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman who had clearly dealt with her fair share of frivolous lawsuits, wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. Harriet's attorney droned on about unlawful dismissal and character assassination, but it was flimsy at best. Then it was our turn. Our lawyer wasted no time presenting the evidence. The illegal fines, the fraudulent invoices, the bank transfers, all laid out in black and white. Witness testimonies from homeowners who had been harassed and threatened. Even Greg's confession, detailing exactly how Harriet had orchestrated everything. By the time we were done, the judge leaned forward, hands folded. "This lawsuit is not only baseless, but it appears to be an attempt to deflect from ongoing criminal investigations." Harriet's jaw tightened. The judge continued. "The recall vote was conducted legally. The evidence of financial misconduct is overwhelming, and this court will not entertain any further attempts to manipulate the legal system for personal gain." And just like that, the case was dismissed. Harriet sat frozen for a moment, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. Then, with a sharp exhale, she stood up and stormed out, her attorney hurrying after her. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs. Outside, reporters swarmed, eager for a statement. I let Rachel handle most of the questions, while Joe and I spoke to the residents who had shown up. The mood was triumphant, but there was still a lingering question: what would happen next? The answer came quicker than expected. With the lawsuit dead in the water and her financial crimes fully exposed, Harriet was formally indicted within the week. She and several former board members faced charges ranging from fraud to conspiracy to commit theft. The trial, when it finally happened, was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury didn't need long to deliberate. Harriet was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Greg, having cooperated with authorities, got a reduced sentence. Others involved received varying degrees of punishment, but the message was clear: this wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was real justice. With the corrupt leadership gone, the neighborhood finally had a chance to rebuild. The new HOA board, now made up of actual residents who cared about the community, focused on undoing the damage. Fines were refunded, unnecessary restrictions were lifted, and transparency became the new standard. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the rooftops, Joe walked up, hands in his pockets. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he said. I nodded. "Yeah, it does." Rachel joined us a moment later, carrying a folder. "Final count," she said, handing it over. "Every dollar that was stolen, every fine that was illegally issued, it's all accounted for now." I flipped through the pages. "And the last of the funds?" "Being returned to the residents," she said. "Every single cent." Joe let out a low whistle. "Never thought I'd see the day." I closed the folder, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Harriet thought she could control everything. Thought she was untouchable. Rachel smirked. "Guess she learned the hard way." The neighborhood had been through hell, but we had come out stronger. Harriet's reign had ended, and in its place, something better had taken root. As I glanced down the street, watching kids play on freshly repaired sidewalks and families talk without fear of HOA harassment, I knew one thing for certain: this was our neighborhood now, and no one would ever take it from us again.